The 16th chapter commences with these words: "All those who falsify the Pope's bulls or a bishop's letter are cursed grievously in all churches 4 times in the year." Here Wycliffe proceeds to ask, "Lord, why was not Christ's gospel put in this sentence by our worldly clerics?" Here it seems they magnify the Pope's bull more than the gospel, and in token of this they punish more the men who trespass against the Pope's bulls than those who trespass against Christ's gospel. And hereby men of this world dread more the Pope's lead and his commandment than the gospel of Christ and God's commands. And thus wretched men in this world are brought out of belief and hope and charity, and become rotten in heresy and blasphemy, even worse than heathen hounds. Also a penny clerk, who can neither read nor understand a verse of his psalter, nor repeat God's commandments, bringeth forth a bull of lead, witnessing that he is able to govern many souls against God's doom and open experience of truth. And to procure this false bull they incur costs and labor, and oftentimes fight, and give much gold out of our land to aliens and enemies, and many thereby are dead by the hand of our enemies, to their comfort and our confusion. Also the proud priest of Rome getteth images of Peter and Paul, and maketh Christian men believe that all which his bulls speak of is done by authority of Christ. And thus, as far as he may, he maketh this bull, which is false, to be Peter's and Paul's and Christ's, and in that maketh them false. And by this blasphemy he robbeth Christendom of faith, and good life, and worldly goods. And if any poor man tell the truth of Holy Writ against the hypocrisy of Antichrist and his officers, none else follows but to curse him, naught else follows but to curse him, to imprison, burn, and slay him, without answer. It now seemeth that John's prophecy in the Apocalypse is fulfilled, that no man shall be hardy enough to buy or sell without the token of the cursed beast. For now no man shall do aught in the street without these false bulls of Antichrist, not taking reward to the worship of Jesus Christ and of the Holy Ghost in men's souls, but all to these dead bulls, bought and sold for money, as men buy or sell an ox or beast." In the 17th chapter the Reformer says, "The gospel telleth that at doomsday Jesus Christ shall reckon generally with men for works of mercy, and if they have not done them, then, as Christ biddeth, they shall be damned without end. But Christ shall not then speak a word of tithes. If indeed men grant that tithes are works of mercy, and alms is feeding and clothing poor men, certainly it seemeth that all this cursing is for their own covetousness, not for the sins of the people, or any trespass against God. For then their curse should be most where there is most sin, and despite against God. But this is not done, as all-knowing men see manifestly. The law, it is alleged, teaches that no man who is himself rightfully cursed may lawfully curse another. But the clergy who fail to discharge the duties of their solemn office are under the curse of the head of the church, and are sinners 1,000-fold more than are the people, when their great fault is that they pay not their tithes." The Reformer expands this grave accusation in the following terms: "Christ said that the Son of Man came not to lose men's lives and souls, but to save them, as the Gospel of Luke witnesseth. Why then dare these wayward curates to curse so many men's souls to hell, and bodies to prison, and to the loss of chattels, and sometimes to death, for a little muck, while they are themselves cursed of God for simony done at their entrance into office, and for failure in preaching, and an example of holy life, tithes being not therefore due to them, but only pain in hell. Oftentimes they are evil tormentors, and slay the soul bought with Christ's precious blood, which is better than all the riches of this world. They are not spiritual fathers to Christian souls, who would damn them to hell by their cursing for the sake of a little perishing clay. Even pagan persecutors were content to torment the body, and not the soul forevermore, but these children of Satan cast about by all means in their power to slay the soul in everlasting pain. Certainly these wayward curates of Satan seem in this thing worse than the fiends of hell, For in hell they torment no soul except for everlasting sin, while these clerks of Satan curse souls to hell for a little temporal debt, which they will pay as soon as they are able, and ofttimes when there is no debt, except by long error and theft and custom brought in against God's commandments. In the next chapter, the Reformer insists that the clergy, in place of demanding tithes from the more needy of their flock, should employ their influence with the rich to procure relief for the necessities of the poor. Men wonder highly, he observes, why curates are so charouche to the people in taking tithes, since Christ and his apostles took no tithes as men do now, and neither paid them or even spoke of them, either in the gospel or the epistles, which are the perfect law of freedom and grace. But Christ lived on the alms of Mary Magdalene and of other holy women, as the gospel telleth. And the apostles lived, sometimes by the labor of their hands, and sometimes took a poor livelihood and clothing, given of free will and devotion by the people, without asking or constraining. And to this end Christ said to his disciples that they should eat and drink such things as were set before them, and take neither gold nor silver for their preaching, or giving of sacraments. And Paul, giving a general rule for priests, said thus, "We having food and clothing to hide us, with these things we shall be assayed, as Jesus Christ." And Paul proved that priests preaching truly the gospel should live by the gospel, and said no more of tithes. Certes, as tithes was due to priests and deacons in the old law, so bodily circumcision was then needful to all men, but it is not so now in the law of grace. And yet Christ was circumcised. But we read not where he took tithes as we do, and we read not in all the gospel where he paid tithes to the high priest, or bid any other man do so. Lord, why should our worldly priests charge Christian people with tithes, offerings, and customs more than did Christ and his apostles, and more than men were charged in the old law? For then all priests and deacons and officers of the temple were maintained by tithes and offerings, and had no other lordship. But now a worldly priest, who is more unable than others by means of a bull of Antichrist, hath all the tithes and offerings to himself. If tithes were due by God's commandment, then everywhere in Christendom would be one mode of tithing, but it is not so. Would God that all wise and true men would inquire whether it were not much better for to find good priests by free alms of the people, and in a reasonable and poor livelihood, to teach the gospel in word and deed, as did Christ and his apostles, than thus to pay tithes to a worldly priest, ignorant and negligent, as men are now constrained to do by bulls and new ordinances of priests. Wycliffe then demands to know who has given this coercive power to churchmen, seeing that Christ and his disciples had it not, and adds, "If the first ordinance of Christ and his apostles come again to Christendom, then shall Christian people be free to take their tithes and offerings from wayward priests, and not maintain them in sin. But it is at the same time said that they must contribute reasonable livelihood to good priests, and this were much better and easier for both for priests and commons, for this world and the other." In the beginning of the next chapter there is mention of the council in London at time of the earth shaking, an allusion which farther shows that this treatise was written not more than 2 years at the most before the decease of the Reformer. The clergy present on that occasion are said to have introduced a new dispensation, declaring it to be error to say that secular lords may at their doom, in the exercise of their own opinion or authority, take temporal goods from the church, which trespasseth by long custom. To which it is replied, if this be error, as they say falsely, then the king and secular lords may take no farthing, nor farthing's worth from a worldly clerk, though he should owe him or his liegemen never so much, and may well pay it, but will not. It is insisted that on this principle, were the College of Cardinals to become an organized banditti, the authority of the king should not be exercised to curb their marauding. Should such men send money out of the land to never so great an extent, the monarch must not suppose that it pertains to him to prevent such impoverishment of the realm. And were a body of monks, friars, or clerks to conspire the poisoning of the king, the queen, and all the lords of the realm, yet the king with all the lords may not punish such offenders with the loss of 1 farthing's worth of their goods. The same exemption, it is argued, might be pleaded were these people to defile the bed of the sovereign, to devise the death of the king and the queen, to attempt the extinction of all the gentle blood of the land, and to combine to make one of themselves king of all the world. Let it be presumed that the sovereign may not touch the property of such persons, and it must be concluded that he may not touch their persons, seeing that their persons are held to be the most sacred, and thus to concede this clerical pretension would be at once to sheathe the sword of the magistrate, and to give a license to all wickedness. But such men should know, it is observed, that Holy Church consists not of the clergy, but of all men and women who shall be saved, and that to take away the goods which worldly churchmen misapply, and to give them to men who will apply them to their scriptural uses, must be to do the good deeds proper to the vicar of God, and no king need fear the censures of the clergy in so doing. In several of the remaining chapters, mention is made of the right of sanctuary claimed by Westminster, Beverley, and other places, and the abuses which had grown up in connection with them are forcibly exposed. It is remarked that the cities of refuge to which these places professed to be conformed afforded shelter to the manslayer only, and to such as one when he had slain a man unawares, while these Christian sanctuaries became a hiding place to willful and known offenders, and to such as might make reparation for their crimes. But it was not enough thus to prevent the course of civil justice. The magistrate was often censured because he could not be made to do unjustly. Then these worldly clerks curse the king and his justices and officers, because they maintain the gospel and true preachers thereof, and will not punish them according to the wrongful commandment of Antichrist and his clerks. But where are fouler heretics than these worldly clerks, thus cursing true men, and stirring the king and his liegemen to persecute Jesus Christ and his members, and to exile the gospel out of our land? In many instances, however, the attempt to make such use of the civil sword was successful, and kings and lords were constrained to torment the body of a just man, over whom Satan has no power, as though he were a strong thief, casting him into a deep prison, to make other men afraid to stand on God's part against their heresy. Some observations on legal studies occur in the first part of the treatise. The civil law is said to be studied unduly, and as our people are bound by the king's statutes, these are accounted as more worthy of being studied and taught by the clergy. The emperor's law, it is said, should be studied and its authority admitted only in so far as it is enclosed in God's commandments, and it is demanded of those who profess to study the civil law, for the reason they find in it, whether the volume placed in their hands by the author of reason is not likely better to repay their labor in that respect. The Pope, says Wycliffe, has forbidden the study of civil law, and for once, he adds, the Pope's intent is good. But he observes further that the canon law is more hostile to the religion of the Bible than the code of Justinian. The whole of the 24th chapter relates to this subject. In the next chapter is the following striking observation on one of the most disgraceful usages in the history of religious intolerance. All those who commune with accursed men are cursed by our prelates, particularly if they do it knowingly. But by this sentence it would seem that God himself is accursed, since no accursed man may be in this life unless God shall knowingly commune with him, and give him breath and sustenance, whether he be wrongfully cursed or rightfully. And if he be ready to give such a man grace and forgiveness of his sins, if he ask it worthily, and even before he ask it, this sentence seems too large, since our God may not be accursed. In this manner did the Reformer deal with a practice in which men have been taught to assign religious reasons for doing violence to all the deeper instincts of our moral nature. It is one of the strong forms in which we read the demoralizing tendency of religious bigotry. The treatise concludes with the following earnest utterances. Men wonder much why prelates and curates curse so fast, since St. Paul and St. Peter have commanded men to bless and not to have a will to curse. And Jesus Christ blessed his enemies and heartily prayed for them, even while they nailed him to the cross. Still more men wonder why they curse so fast in their own cause and for their own gain, and not for injury done to Christ and his majesty, since men should be patient in their own wrongs as Christ and his disciples were, and not suffer a word to be done against God's honor and majesty, as by false and vain swearing, ribaldry, lechery, and other filth. But most of all, men wonder why worldly clerks curse so fast for breaking of their own statutes, privileges, and wayward customs, more than for the open breaking of God's commandments, since no man is cursed of God but for so doing, whatever worldly wretches may blabber, and no man is blessed of God and shall come to heaven, but he who keepeth God's commandments. And particularly in the hour of death, let a man have never so many 1,000 bulls of indulgence or pardon, and letters of fraternity, and thousands of masses from priests, and monks and friars, and it shall be vain. Let prelates and curates therefore leave these particulars in their censuring, for many of them are as false as Satan, and let them teach God's commandments and God's curse, and let the pains of hell as inflicted on men, if they amend not in this life, and what bliss men shall have for keeping of them, as they thereby teach truly Christ's gospel in word and in example of holy life, and the mercy of God and the highness of his blessing, and so help all to that end in right belief and hope toward God, and full charity toward God and man. God grant us this end. Amen.